Welcome back, folks, for another fun reloading video. Today's video is going to be about how to turn your 556 brass into 300 Blackout brass. There are many videos like it, but this one is mine. It's not the most high speed, most operator, most elite way to do this, but it works, and I've done thousands of cases this way so far. First off, we'll start with a list. Why do we need a list for this? That's because not every piece of brass is made equally. If you were to whip out your personal tracking device, I mean phone, we can search on the internet for good 300 Blackout conversion cases. And our very first option here is going to be what we need. I'll spare you on all the details as to why some work and some don't, but long story short, it's where we create our new neck and how thick that wall is going to be at that precise location. And why this wall thickness matters is because if our wall thickness is too thick, once we have our bullet seated, we won't be able to chamber our round properly. But in this thread, you'll find an extensive list with most known head stamps, and whether or not you can be able to convert them into 300 Blackout. Whenever I'm sorting all of my range brass when I get home, I'll have 3 piles for my 556 brass that I pick up. One pile will be for Lake City only. The second pile will be for good head stamps that I can turn into 300 Blackout. And then my final pile is going to be for everything left, and that's what I'll actually use for my 223. So now that we know which head stamps we can convert, and I'll link that thread down in the description of this video, we need to know what else we need. Well, most of these are going to be military head stamps, so we're going to have to be able to ream out our primer pockets or swage, somehow get rid of that military crimp. We're going to need some sort of chop saw. Some people can also use a pipe cutter if you want to go really low budget with it. And if you want, you can also use a jig to also speed things up. After we've chopped our brass down, this is where some people like to anneal before they form it, and some people like to anneal after they form it. I personally have never annealed a case before, but I'm running pretty low pressure rounds here, and some people are only shooting subsonic 300 Blackout, so these cases aren't going to be worked as hard as your full pressure, 110 grain supersonic loads. So again, you can stop to anneal before we form the brass, or wait until we form it, and then anneal that neck and soften it up a bit. But that might be for another video where we can learn how to do that. And then to form our brass, I'm going to be using the Lee 300 Blackout full-length sizing die. So what we're running up into the die, we start with this straight wall case, kind of a 350 Legend super short action. And then what comes out is this really, really long 300 Blackout case. And depending on your jig, you'll have a little more or a little less to trim off there once you've formed your neck. And lastly, on the topic of forming, it's important to lube up your cases before you run them into your die. Which lube you use isn't entirely important to me. I've been having good luck with the one shot. If these were larger cases, like if I was sizing a 30-06 down into a 308 or something, I would definitely use the Imperial sizing wax because that's probably the best stuff around. But if you're kind of new and you're just starting out, Lee's going to send out some free lube in their die sets most of the time, so you can check that out. Hornady also makes kind of a pasty lube, sort of like the Imperial wax you can use. There's all kinds of options, but make sure you're lubing your cases when you're forming your necks. So now that we've formed our piece of brass, it's about 8 miles long, you can see. Now we have to trim this sucker down. And our maximum case length for 300 Blackout before trimming should only be 1.368. So that makes our trim to length 1.358. However, you can go as low as 1.348 and still be within spec. So now that we know our trim to length, we need to trim to that length. There's over 1,000 ways to trim a hat, but today we're going to use the Lee case length gauge and lock stud. And once we're trimmed to length, while I still have this in my drill, I'm going to grab my multi-tool and hit the inside and outside of the mouth to get rid of those burrs, and then we are good to go. So that was the short version. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you on the next video. But if you want to hang out, see the long version, I'll show you each step, and we're going to turn our free 223 brass into brand new 300 Blackout. So where we're going to start, we're going to pretend I've already sorted out all my brass, because I have. I've already explained how I do that after the range. And so now we have to chop the neck off out of all those head stamps we set aside. So here we have my 300 Blackout chopping setup. Here I've got our Harbor Freight chop saw. You can usually use your 20 or 30% off coupon and get these for maybe $25 out the door. You can see I've got one of these jigs here already installed down below. You can get these online all kinds of places. This one was 3D printed. Some people make them out of aluminum and all kinds of fun stuff. So whatever's in your budget, you can find a jig just for you. And depending on your setup, you can have a shop vac attached in here somewhere to suck all this junk up as it gets chopped off of your case. But I don't want to always mess with the shop vac, so I've got this little plastic dish tub from the dollar store, and it catches all of your little brassy bits just fine. I've been working on these already for about an hour. I've got a couple left here just to show you. And over there's all the ones I've already done. They're all mixed head stamps, but they're off of the good list of cases. So we should have no problem once we're forming them. Aside with having my jig installed here, I've cut off the bottom of this little safety lever so you don't have to engage it every time you want to lower your blade. So now I can just freely move it up and down. I've got about 6 cases left. I think I did about 700 here in about an hour, maybe less. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and you don't have to race through it. And my current blade is probably about 5,000 cases old, so it'd probably work a lot smoother if I threw a new blade in there, but it's still going strong. This brass is pretty soft compared to the blade there. You've got to be careful sometimes to not push too quickly, or these guys like to get caught on the blade and they'll actually go flying at you. So make sure to wear your eye protection. Speaking of protection, this is loud as hell, so I'm wearing little ear foamies, as you should too, because once you lose your hearing, you will never get it back. Real quick, I'll find a Lake City case I can throw in here, and I'll show you how to do it without the jig, in case you don't ever end up finding one of those. Here's a close-up on our jig after roughly 1,500 to 2,000 pieces. You can see where it gets kind of worn in here on the neck. And it also gets worn down a little bit on the back, so as you push it against the back here, they'll kind of stretch longer and longer where you end up cutting it, so that adds a little bit more trim length for you. And then I've also got this other one. The guy said it was made out of a harder plastic, but unfortunately it had a little bit of warpage while it was printing, so the cases are a little bit tighter to fit through there. But it still worked fine. I did maybe 50 with this one when we first started. And again, we don't have to have a jig, but it just makes it a lot easier. But again, I'll show you how to do it without a jig really quickly. So generally, when you have these little chop saws, there's actually a little square kind of brick here that'll hold whatever you're cutting in place. I lost mine while I was moving, but it still works all the same. You just got to be a little more careful. And the trick with this is right on the edge of this backstop, that's right where you want to put the top of the case head, right after that little tiny angle. And then I'll put my fat hand in the way as we tighten this down. And now you can see that's being held right there on the end of the case, and it'll actually cut it off right about where we need it. And I'll chamfer and deburr this one real quick, and we'll go ahead and measure it and see how close we are. Okay, we've got our case mouth all nice and smoothed out, and now we'll see if we're anywhere near 1.358. Oh, we're actually a little bit short. We're a couple thousandths short here. Actually about 100 thousandths. However, once we size this, it will stretch out and you'll probably not even have to trim it. And of course, you can kind of play with your alignment there on the backstop and see what works best for you to get that as close as you can. That was just kind of a rough demonstration without the jig, but it'll still work for you. And remember, kids, wear your safety equipment and don't put your hand into the spinning blade. So now, we took this device to take these and remove this and turn it into these. So now we have to take those over to here, where we turn this into this. So I've got 50 cases here lined up in my free from the range case tray. We've already hit it with some one shot from all four sides at a 45-degree angle to make sure to get the interior of our neck. And now we have to simply run it up into our full-length sizing die. So here we are at the rock chucker to install our full-length sizing die. I'm going to go ahead and lower the ram, and while we screw this in here, once we hit contact with the shell holder, we're going to raise our ram just a hair and give it another eighth to a quarter of a turn so we get this camming over effect. And then we can finger tighten our lock ring. It's important to get that good cam over while we're doing that initial forming of the brass. However, later on, when you're just reloading it after it's been fired, we just need to barely bump that shoulder back to resize it again. This way, we're not overworking the brass every time we reload it. And again, since we're at lower pressures with these subsonic rounds and other things that the Blackout's good at, we're not working our brass super hard every time. And since we're all lubed up, I like to go ahead and throw on a glove just so my hands don't get all gooey. So there's 50 cases of our now formed 300 Blackout. I'm going to save all these for later and we will move on to trimming with these here. So we've got our case length gauge installed here on the big knob. We got the shell holder here in the drill and we're ready to trim. But we're experiencing technical difficulties. So funny story, I had previously broken the decapping pin off when I was resizing some 300 Blackout that had a 22 LR case in the bottom of it. So I put in this new stem here, and it's apparently the wrong size 30 caliber stem. Apparently the 300 Blackout decapping stem is different than the one that I got, which is part number SE2169. The 30 caliber easy decapping rod, medium sized is what that is. So there's just a quick heads up if you happen to damage your decapping rod on your 300 Blackout die set. This one that I got is longer than the case and won't properly expand my neck. So we'll just pull these out of the pile here and we will try the Hornady Die Set. So here's our Hornady full-length sizing die with their little zip spindly doodad, and I am certain that it has the proper decapping stem and expander plug in there. So we're going to run them back through with this and see what we end up with. And before I lock this in too tight, since we've already knocked our shoulder back with the lead die, all we're doing is resizing the neck, so I don't need quite as hard of a cam over here. So that should do us just fine. I went ahead and hit the die with some lube here and just a quick spritz over the cases and let that evaporate. So I'm going to run one through here real quick and we will see if our neck fits into our trimmer. Good news, folks. That neck fits right over that case gauge. And now we can trim. So I'm going to run these all through really quick through the Hornady die and then we'll get to trimming here in a minute. So that worked perfect, and now we can finally trim our brass thanks to our Hornady full-length sizing die, saving the day from my dumbass. Here we're finally installed in our drill, and I've got a case here. We have our gauge installed into our ball, and we're going to trim. And then after that, while it's still in the drill, I'll hit it with the deburr tool and clean up the case mouth as well. So trimming is definitely the worst part of this entire process. So I will see you on the other side. Now these Lee trimmers, they're not perfect and they can be quite frustrating at times, but I think they do just fine for their cost. With that being said, I cannot wait to get a proper case prep center. So I did maybe 20 or 25 of these here, and we'll just check them real quick to see what kind of length we ended up with. Our target is 1.358. This one's at 1.36. As long as we're under 1.368, we're good to go. There's a 1.358. And some of these could be my inconsistencies with the chamfer deburr tool. 1.358. So these are all mixed head stamps, and they're all pretty dang consistent, if you ask me. There we go. There's 5 in a row, all at the exact same length. And once we're done here, and they're all finally trimmed and everything, we can throw them in the tumbler and set them aside until we need to use them. And there you have it, folks. That's how we form our 300 Blackout brass from start to finish. If you have made it all the way through this video, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out and spending your time with me. If you have a better way that you form your cases, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. If you anneal your cases before or after forming them, let me know if you think that makes a difference as well. And if you could recommend a case prep center, please do, because I'm kind of on the market for one at this point. But anyways, guys, thanks again for hanging out. Stay tuned for more, and we will see you in the next video.